Then hello and welcome to the webinar Kubernetes, Hard Lessons and How to Avoid Them. My name is Sven Schubert and I work for Giant Swarm. For those who actually don't know who Giant Swarm is, have found us or registered out of curiosity, we manage the fully managed cloud native stack, including Kubernetes for our customers. That means we actually support them in the whole life cycle from installation with a proven set of components, Kubernetes naturally, but there are many more components, as you're quite well aware. We install the same versions with all our customers, so they actually all have access to a very proven setup and versions. Then we secure that for customers. We also manage it together with them, meaning that we've got a dedicated solution engineer. We monitor everything, but we also are available to chat if there are any questions, and we've got weekly calls to help companies then move on to cloud native as quickly as possible. Monitor, I already mentioned, 24/7 for all the master and tenant clusters, and if we actually ever see an issue, we go in and fix it very quickly. So reaction times are way less than 30 minutes to then go in and make sure that everything's up and running. And we deploy these fixes then to all our customers because we actually don't want to get paged more than once for a specific issue. And then we actually do these upgrades together with our customers, make sure that the applications are ready to support the upgraded version. And and then we also supply fixed versions. That means that you can then deploy Kubernetes and the cloud native stack to your test environment exactly the same as in production, so you can make sure that everything is smooth and running. All our insights we generate through working together with customers like Adidas, Binance, Shutterstock, Vodafone, and many more that we have run Kubernetes in production for since 2016, so lots of insight there, and also working together with lots of other clients, engaging with them, lots of conversations that I had in the last year that I actually used to build some use cases or some examples for you to understand what aspects of cloud native can be challenging and how to avoid them. So probably just a quick note, if you've got any questions, just put them in the question box. I will pick them up at the very end of the session, and also you can chat directly with me, and I'll see if I can attend to that. If there are any issues, just let me know. Today, I actually would like to talk about the challenges of Kubernetes and how to avoid them. And if we actually then talk to customers about cloud native, we typically see them focus on, let's say, different aspects of cloud native success and what can contribute to cloud native success. I put down these 5 buckets because everything nearly falls into one of these buckets, and I call them value dimensions that then basically contribute to the cloud native success. One naturally is speed, so how fast your development teams can get started on cloud native, and naturally issue solution and many other things. So being able to deliver value to your customers very quickly, and at the same time, efficiency naturally is very important because you want to make sure that the value you generate for your company, if you're a software developer, for example, then results in the best possible output. So basically the innovation rate. So the more time you actually can focus on innovation, the better, and not waste too much time in the cloud native infrastructure. Reliability naturally is tightly related to customer experience, so making sure that everything is up and running, that loading times are short, and a core value contribution from cloud native, making sure that when you do upgrades, that everything stays up and running. So it's a very smooth cycle for frequent deployments and upgrades without any downtime or interruption. security always comes up. It's a major topic to make sure that everything stays secure. Many digital products today have a lot of personal information included, so what you actually need to make sure is that your setup stays secure at all times. And another aspect that is also very important for developers specifically is the flexibility of using a cloud-native platform the way they need it for their specific use case. And all these dimensions naturally are important to look at the very beginning, but it's also important to take a look at how they can and will look like in the future. So let's say 2 years down the road with multiple teams, multiple cloud providers, then regions, and so on and so forth. So there are different aspects that you can then have a perspective on now, but you also should keep in mind what they actually will develop into, because that will likely impact the focus you need to set upon for the contribution you can provide to your organization in providing a cloud-native platform. So let's jump into the aspects that we just introduced, or I just introduced you to, and take a closer look at what elements can be problematic and how to address them. And let's start off with speed. So when I actually talk to customers, I often use that slide just to depict something that is quite important to understand. We're actually not doing cloud native or Kubernetes just because it's fun. We actually expect outcomes, and the business side also expects outcomes moving to cloud native, especially related to agile software development, making sure you can capture new market opportunities very, very quickly. And you naturally can do everything yourself. So there are tons of open source, the whole CNCF community full of open source projects. Kubernetes itself is open source. Basically you can actually go in and set it up, and that's what quite some customers do. What you actually need to understand is that, at least from a business perspective, it actually takes time to set up things, to get the setup working properly, to get the configurations right, to have the automation in place, and so on and so forth. So actually that can take quite some time to then, to come up with something. And these are numbers that we actually got from clients or from companies out there in the market that have done it themselves. So just taking Zalando as an example, I think they have spent about 2-3 years coming up with the final version, or let's say intermediate version of their cloud native platform, and that can actually, so if you don't have time pressure, that can be a good approach. What we tend to talk to customers about is that with a fully managed provider like us, you actually can be up and running within a week, and then you already have a full support team. So the question is how important time to production is for you. Looking at the challenge, naturally, this is capturing new market opportunities. There's a study by IDC that was released where they interviewed different companies about their cloud native journey, and they found out that in average, I think it's dollar, but put on euro as in error, it's 32 million per year. They actually have more revenue if they go cloud native very, very rapidly. And so basically, if you actually then attribute about 15% in profits, that actually means it's about 5 million per year that you can then achieve through cloud native adoption. So every month that you actually, it takes longer to move to cloud native, for your teams to move to cloud native, there's a big ticket for opportunity cost that you need to be aware of, and that's why speed from our perspective is highly important, and being able to provide your development teams with something that they can use immediately is of tremendous value. there are a couple of examples. So one is a digital retailer that took about 2 to 3 years to implement the platform, but there are also other examples. One is a digital service provider. I've actually tried to avoid naming these companies because that's naturally specific to them. But I hope that actually is at least tangible enough for you. So what they actually did is they took about 2 years to come up with a platform where they basically have all the Kubernetes set up and all the related apps together that they need. They have adjusted it to their network, making sure that their development teams can use everything. So it actually just takes time. Naturally, the question is if you actually have a strict deadline, or if you actually have a scope, a limited scope, if you want to run a POC and try out a new service just to showcase it internally, it probably isn't as relevant to building up a fully fledged environment. If you want to go production at scale within a very clear defined timeline, and maybe have a very complex setup, which we experienced typically with telecommunications companies, where they've got the external side or the internet accessing side not connected to the internal data bases and let's say the core networks, then that's something that adds complexity, and it naturally takes time to set that up and grow that to make sure that all your digital services and products can access both parts of your company infrastructure simultaneously. So the question is this a problem for you or not? If you want to capture market opportunity really rapidly, it actually is. And that's something you just need to think about and experience. And then when you actually just have a POC for, let's say, for a new digital product and want to showcase it internally, that's where typically some developer sets up a Kubernetes environment and then deploys these applications to showcase them internally. We actually have made very good experience with companies like Line and Telecom, which we both actually had very strict deadlines, where they tried to solve it differently before we got introduced, and they were risking of missing these deadlines. So what we actually did is work together with them and made sure that for the different trade shows they introduced their digital products, that everything was up and running, and they actually could use the whole enchilada of public relations to get the new digital products out and communicate it to the market. So in terms of speed, you've got the time to production to really get your development teams producing a digital product, but also there's a dimension of resolving issues. There are always issues. There's either something wrongly configured or some bug in one of the components, or let's say changes to apps that can have a great impact on the platform. So we actually see many issues on a daily basis where we interact with our customers. And the challenge that you actually have if you're not aware of that and don't factor in that impact, is that you will have a lot lower velocity in terms of bringing your tickets and user stories to production, and naturally the efficiency of the development teams decreases because typically in environments they need to figure out why it's not working, and that causes a lot of friction and delays. If you take that number that I depicted on the previous slide from the IDC case study, then that's something that you can actually quickly relate to in terms of opportunity cost, but also real cost in terms of the cost of developer and teams taking care of the issues themselves. A very good example, I think, just to get an idea of how big that can grow, The issue is a digital retailer. It's very well known. They've got 10 platform engineers just firefighting all day long. Naturally, they've got a large setup with, I think, more than 120 clusters, and so it also relates to the size of the company and how much business you do digitally. But if you actually do digital or if you actually have a digital product or your whole business model relies on a digital platform, then you actually need to factor in quite a significant amount of time to attribute to issue identification, isolation, then resolution, testing, and deployment. So there are many aspects that are related to issues, and naturally, if you just restart your pods, then that's probably not too much of an issue. If you really want to solve problems permanently, then that's a different story. So the question that you need to ask yourself is how much time do I factor in, and what impact does it have on velocity? If you've got a platform team just taking care of that, then the question is, how can I better invest time to enable the development teams using the technology? So it's not only related to the development teams that need to develop digital products and that can attribute their the opportunity to really focus on the digital product to higher innovation, but also enabling development teams to achieve a higher innovation rate and make sure that they actually can bring out the digital product as quickly as possible. Again, here it's not a clear recommendation because it depends on how strong your innovation rate is. So how much the pressure for innovation is in your market or for your digital product. It also depends on how diverse the services you're developing. So we actually also talked to a company that delivers a standard product and just uses Kubernetes to deploy that standard product to all different customers. Then that's naturally, let's say, a lot less of variety or diversity of applications running on the platform. The outcome is more predictable, and so you can contain issues a lot better than if you've got a great diversity of applications running by a great diversity of teams with different levels of knowledge about cloud native, and it also depends on how abundant your access to talent is. So what if you actually have teams already in your company that you can easily deploy to such a platform team, then that's a different story versus a company that is trying to acquire talent and has and could use that talent for developing digital products rather than running an infrastructure. And actually your goal. So if you keep it on a very low level, then you probably will run into less issues than if you actually are thinking about scaling globally. So that's something where you just need to factor in time and plan for issue resolution. Actually, I've got some numbers later on where I can share some insight into what we spend in terms of issue resolution for our customers and what they would have to do otherwise themselves. So the third aspect of speed, which I encountered or have a great example for, is deploying upgrades. So there are frequent upgrades to Kubernetes, but also the whole cloud native stack around it. If it is Vault for certificates and Calico and Prometheus and so on and so forth. Ingress controller is, for example, for us a source of many issues that we focus and try to resolve. And so the question is, how can you make sure that you run into less and less issues, even though you might not experience them in the current version? Once you may use a different approach or a different technology, deploy a new service, you actually might run into the issues. So the question is, how fast can I upgrade to new versions? How seamless is that process to make sure that you you benefit from the fixes that are part of the new upgrades, but also get access to new technologies. Maybe to improve user experience, like canary testing or notebooks, reduce cost to spot instances and so on, or increase flexibility through adding more and more apps to the environment. The business impact here is also very clear. Is the availability, naturally, and security of the platform, making sure that everything stays up and running, but also the user experience. So it actually relates or it is directly related to revenue. If customers are unhappy, they are more likely to move to another website, especially in the times we live, where innovation rates are very short. And we actually have lots of services that can be provided across the world. The competition is getting fiercer, so the question is, how can I position myself a lot better than my competition and provide an outstanding user experience? One very interesting example was from a car manufacturer we spoke to at that time. They told us they actually had been running on Kubernetes 1.5 for 2 years, and they were unable to upgrade. At that time, 1.12 was out, so you can see there are 7 subversions missing. And the challenge, what they actually had, is that in terms of setup, they had all the teams running in a single cluster, and the release cycles were very differently, the products were very differently. So there was always one team blocking because they weren't ready for the upgrade, and that actually made it impossible for this car manufacturer to upgrade their Kubernetes version. So yeah, there are ways to get around that, setting up different clusters, for example, for different teams. But yeah, in general, it's something that also with very experienced customers that we actually have is a learning process. So we're actually going through that over and over again. We try to do upgrades very, very frequently, and our mantra there is, if it hurts, do it more often. So really go in and try to make sure that the upgrade process is very, very smooth, and actually that all the development teams understand what it takes to get the application or services prepared for the upgrade, and make sure that the platform teams are ready to do the upgrades then, especially in a staged environment where you can then upgrade your test environments and make sure that you can deploy to production with the same version as your test environment has. So there are many ways of improving the deployment and upgrade process, and making sure that you always stay on a very secure version, and with a lot less issues, and can use the new technology that may be included in the different versions of the components of the platform. Now, if we talk about, which is the second column, the efficiency. So the question that I actually depict here is, how much time does your internal team, and you will always have an internal team that then basically runs the cloud native platform, how much time can they attribute to making the developer experience a wonderful experience and very efficient for them to use and consume? And if you do everything yourself, naturally the internal team takes care of everything, and then there are different iterations. So you either go with a public cloud or a container management platform, where you use a fully managed service like Giant Swarm. The story here is not that the internal team gets smaller. The intention here is actually to communicate that the more you actually can have companies focus, or your company focus on making the platform easily consumable for your cloud native teams or development teams, the faster they can advance with their digital product, and the more business opportunity you can capture as a company. So it's more related to where do I invest my resources rather than how many resources do I actually need as a company to really move to cloud native. So the developer empowerment is part of, or a key part of the efficiency column that we depicted before. And this is, as I said, it's about making sure that the development teams can rapidly transition to cloud native. There's a study from Harvard that basically says that 30% growth rate is a higher growth rate is attributed to innovators versus laggards. So those that actually are able to move faster achieve a 30% higher growth rate increase than laggards in the same industry. So it actually just shows that you actually can really achieve real business value by making sure that the developers can focus on innovation as much as possible. There's a large digital service provider. They are offering different digital products to end customers. And with that company, when I spoke, they actually had 8 people taking care of the platform. So they actually built it up all by themselves. They manage everything up by themselves. They actually also were very proud to say that they are always on the latest versions of Kubernetes. But then I asked the question, well, so is this widely deployed within the company? And the answer was a staggering no, because the development teams are not there yet. And that's something that where something like this went totally wrong. Because then it's different responsibilities, just like in the old world where you actually develop a package and someone would run it for you, and you basically don't consider the responsibility of coming up with a value for the company. This is something where the development teams would have done a very good job if they actually had focused on bringing the internal development teams to the level to fully understand what it means to operate the microservices, what cloud native means. Probably also get an external service company in to help in the transition of that process. But currently, if the usage is low, the cost per cloud native application is very high for infrastructure, and that actually makes very little sense. So the idea here is to actually really take a step back and look at the bigger picture in terms of investment. What can I really impact in terms of cloud native? What do we want to achieve as a company in moving to cloud native? And how can I best support the development teams making the biggest impact? And I also put down, starting from differentiating to commodity, always start where it actually helps your company differentiate from your competition, and less on commodity like a Kubernetes stack, which basically everyone can download and just needs to run. But there is no great level of differentiation in that stack because it's available to everyone. So the more time you actually have to focus on what sets you apart, the more time, the more opportunity you actually can capture in the market. And that's the bigger picture you just need to keep in mind. So focusing your platform team or tasking your platform team to enable your development teams to move onto cloud native is a very good idea, and something that you should definitely include in your assessment of your current strategy. So if we actually talk about operational overhead, which is also a part of the efficiency gain. So if your teams take care of the cloud native environment for either a dedicated or as a side project, basically they start up setting up one environment with the control plane and the different nodes, and then you naturally have the Kubernetes component, and you've got logging and tracing and reporting, which you have, and then you might add a service mesh. So basically, you actually build up this environment, and you manage this environment. And for an initial project, even if it goes live, that may be already a quite an intensive task. But that's not where the story ends. And I actually took these slides from our CTO, who actually held a speech at one of the tech conferences and got lots of applause for it, because that's what the actually our teams experienced over and over again, and you may have also experienced yourself. So you actually start with this single environment, then you actually scale up. You want one environment for dev, one for test, one for prod. Then you actually have one per team, like a web shop team, a payment service team, product catalog team, logistics integration team. So that's where then you suddenly actually have many more, and then you actually have the beauty of having different cloud providers, different regions that you need to manage, and that's where all the operational overhead comes, and that's why we invested so much time in automation around Kubernetes to make sure that supporting complex setups, as they will always grow into these complex setups, is something that is very, very important to consider when going on a cloud native journey. So as I said, the question is, how much time do your software developers spend, or your infrastructure engineers spend on innovation and enabling innovation, and how much on platform operations and automation? You actually will need automation in place, so that's something that you actually should consider and factor in terms of time quite significantly. If you actually want to do 24/7, you typically need 5 people to do that. So they actually need to get accustomed to the technology. They need to get involved in creating and developing automation to help them do their job a lot better. And you actually naturally can do that. But the question is, are they wasting time in commodity, or are they helping differentiation? This is a question that you need to answer for yourself. If you actually are thinking about setting up a team or already have a team that then basically is focused on platform operations, in addition to the development teams, then the question is, can they actually better help the development teams rather than spend time in managing very complex setups. There's also the other story, and that's where the example comes in, where typically teams take care of Kubernetes initially themselves. And that's something quite interesting phenomenon we actually see across the board, no matter if it's a small company or a big company. In the network solutions company I spoke to, the developers operate Kubernetes all by themselves as a side project. And that's where basically, as I said before, a lot of time goes into operating something that actually doesn't differentiate itself, but that goes into commodity. As long as the projects are small, and that's where you need to make a decision. So if there's a project here where you've got little changes, where you've got a stable application, as mentioned before, where you just use Kubernetes to deploy it easily to all your customers. If you've got a limited amount of teams, a limited amount of teams that you will support also in the future, then it still might still make sense to do that yourself. But if you actually have a great variety of applications, if you've got a high demand for innovation and a growing number of product teams, that's where it actually makes a lot more sense to think about the setup and think about the operational overhead you will run into, and how you actually want to make sure that you can still spend most of your energy in innovation and increase the velocity of your software development team rather than bog them down with complex setups and developing something that you probably could easily get somewhere else. And the last aspect of efficiency is when it comes to knowledge sharing. The aspect here is that we actually experienced that it actually takes some time to build up knowledge. Every new employee we actually have, it takes them quite some time to get accustomed to the technology, even though they might have done Kubernetes in the past with either a company or one of the service providers. So it still takes time to really understand how the whole environment is developing, even understanding the different elements of it, all the issues, technical issues you can run into in developing your Kubernetes setup. And the other aspect is naturally it actually becomes a management task. So you need to understand how you can not only acquire talent but also retain talent and then naturally replace them if they decide to leave. And how much time you put into a repetitive effort. Let's say you've got different teams, and all the different teams need to go through the same learning curve instead of maybe even with different cloud providers, which makes it a very repetitive effort and very little value for you as a company. So this is something where you need to think about how you can actually set up and empower your teams and make sure that transition is very smooth of knowledge and experience across your company. That naturally results in higher efficiency and less risk in exceeding your budget and timeline, especially for projects that have a very strict timeline. Highly important. We ran into that issue with a telco provider who came to us after trying to run Kubernetes twice themselves with two different solutions, and they failed. So they actually ended up with us, and they experienced, I think the delay was over half a year in their project. And you can associate a budget to that time wasted, not only in indirect cost like opportunity cost, but also in terms of direct costs, all the energy that actually went into setting up and trying and running and fixing the platforms that actually didn't result in success. It's something that you actually see now and again in the space, and quite interestingly, it actually, while not many people like to speak about it, it actually isn't. It actually happens quite frequently. Another aspect that I actually wanted to bring up is because we actually also see that with customers that people who've been working together with for a while and actually got very experienced in Kubernetes leave the company then to join cloud providers, or let's say this is a immensely growing market, so there are lots of companies that actually are looking for experts in the Kubernetes space, and once you actually do this very successfully, then naturally you you get opportunities to join other companies. And we actually did some research on the case studies provided by or published within the CNCF, and found out that 60% of the reference contacts named in the companies actually are no longer with these companies. So this actually shows a very low retention of the Kubernetes experts in the field, at least the good ones. And that's something that you need to be aware of when you actually go down the Kubernetes spaces, that you actually factor in, let's say, a certain amount of overhead in managing and retaining and replacing your Kubernetes expertise. So what you actually need to see is if you want to use external resources to build up that knowledge very rapidly, especially if you've got a new team, and factor in that knowledge drain and the energy you need for that. Good. So this covers the first two columns. One is the speed, the other one is the efficiency, the third one is the reliability. And The reliability column is not only that the system is down, but also if it actually loads very slowly and isn't available in the way it should. And here there's also some statistics I have from retail system research. They basically said that in a research they did with 1,300 US consumers, 57% of the shoppers have already left a slow loading e-commerce site and then bought from a similar retailer. So and this is a quite significant number, especially in retail. That's you know where you've got price comparison and availability, but that's where what actually also one of our customers experiences, that the shorter you can make the loading times, the smoother the site works in terms of user experience, the better it is, and the higher the revenue is. Interesting enough, another fun fact is 23% said that that when someone left the e-commerce site, they never returned to the brand's website ever again due to slow performance. So this is something that yeah, you actually just need to consider when talking about and why considering reliability is such a key. One is naturally 24/7 uptime and full availability. So the question is, who gets up in the middle of the night? How to prevent downtime and who can fix it? So you actually need expertise in this area. We also heard from a large car manufacturer that actually took a different stab at that approach. Basically, the platform team said that they agreed with all product teams that a support from 9 to 5 is sufficient. So if you actually if you actually accept, even if it's an internal product, that you're actually that 9 to 5 is you know, it's absolutely works fine for you in terms of uptime. When you know something goes down in the middle of the night, you come in next morning, you look at the problem, then you start resolving the problem. Then that's no issue at all. What I just would like to highlight here is that it probably isn't even, you know, unless you're a retailer or whatever, but it's probably a bigger impact on your development teams and a cost attributed to that if they actually can't work or if their work is impeded. So, you know, really consider yourself not only in terms of externally, you know, it depends on how many users you have on the platform and what kind of application it is, to then support 24/7. Also, think of your internal development teams. If they actually have an unreliable platform, then that actually creates a huge problem. Another company I talked to, they actually had, well, actually I'll talk about that a bit later because the story is quite interesting in the different context. But yeah, they basically had a 48-hour downtime for a consumer product, and yeah, and that actually caused quite some impact. Especially in user statistics later on. So the question that you just need to answer yourself, because here again there's no right and wrong, but if actually 24/7 is not an issue for you, then it's probably because the application is of either low impact or low relevance. But if you've got a high impact application out there like a web shop or whatever, I think it's absolutely mandatory. And something you definitely need to consider how you can actually best support that. Also in terms of predictive or preventive activities, scaling up different clusters or the capacity of the clusters, making sure that you actually have yeah, if let's say if you actually have a Black Friday or a sales event that is very specific to a certain product you issue, that you actually scale things up in advance because the system actually won't be fast enough if you actually have a lot of traffic joining immediately. The other aspect that you need to consider is the permanent issue resolution. So if you actually have yeah, if you've got your computer, your Kubernetes environment, and you've got a self-healing, well, everything's stays or seems to stay up and running, but in reality, the issues that you may experience show up repeatedly. There is quite some effort involved in doing root cause analysis, isolating issues, making sure you actually know why it appears, testing it, and then deploying it, especially since more and more issues can't be directly attributed to a certain component, but actually are in between. It's because two elements aren't working together, or you actually have configured them in a way that they don't work properly together. So that's actually where a lot of frustration comes, and actually in the team, if they actually have to take care of the same issue over and over again, that's where we established automation, because we actually don't want that, and deploy all the fixes to our customers at the same time, or at least the same fix to all our customers. And naturally it can affect user experience, as we actually also depicted before. Just to give you also a feeling for how much time actually can go into issue resolution. With the customers we actually have, we run into about 600 postmortems a year. That means we actually identify an issue. We can find a way around it, but we actually need to further investigate to really fix it permanently. And that's where you could invest anything between 2 and 5 days to really to work on this through. So in terms of yes, we actually have very different customers and larger installations, as most customers actually would have themselves, but still that is a repetitive work that all customers or all companies would have to do. So it might be well advised to then really understand if different teams can actually use the same setup to make sure that whatever you invest in this area benefits the other area too. And time actually goes into issue identification, isolation, and fixing and rolling it out. So that's just to give you an idea of why permanent issue resolution we believe is very important. Again, here you need to balance the effort you actually have versus the benefit or the impact it can have. I actually talked to a friend over the weekend who said that their Kubernetes setup goes down twice for 2 minutes every month, which is fine for them. So it's something. It depends on what your expectations are, what impact it can have. For a consumer website at the weekend, 48 hours is a different story versus, let's say, a business website that may be unavailable for 2 minutes at the weekend. But that's something that you really need to understand, and also what skill you have available and how you can attribute the skill to something that you benefit from most. Something else that I already alluded to was that it actually makes sense to gather input from different teams and make sure that the components work very smoothly together, and that you actually really make sure that you can deploy the same version of the setup to test environment and production environment to make sure that you can that whatever you tested runs very smoothly on the production environment. So outages can create naturally high effort for issue identification. So the more you actually use something that already has been deployed across your company, the better it is. And if you actually have certain setups, then you actually should make sure through automation that these setups actually don't change. So I talked to an automotive company once that actually used scripts to build clusters, and they then manually applied changes later, made adjustments, and installed different apps. So basically everything that wasn't covered through automation, they basically did manually, and they ended up with a myriad of different versions that they actually couldn't really test the software on because they actually didn't know what changes that had been made in production, which created a huge blocker for them to deploy fast and frequently. So that's where innovation is blocked, and you just need to make sure that you actually have you've got an environment that supports you in that setup. Automation is key, and upgrades, frequent upgrades. It would be better to not only upgrade the components, but actually to fully replace the nodes, and making sure that they actually run on the same version. So I actually, in terms of time, I'll actually run through the next slides very quickly. Security, naturally very important. What you actually need to factor in is that sometimes you actually might not do upgrades as they are recommended, because you actually want your development teams to focus on new features. That's what the telco company did, and they ended up having a cryptocurrency mining bot on their machines. So that's something that you should consider, especially in terms of providing flexibility while securing the access through ORBAC, role-based access, and PSP, pod security policies. So that's something that you should definitely do instead of let's say using the standard open source components that typically aren't tightened for enterprise security, because it's something that is contradiction to open source, which is make everything easy to experience, and then go to a professional setup later. In terms of flexibility, I actually would just like to highlight Vanilla Open Source, because that's an example I actually ran into with a client. It's when you actually don't use Vanilla Open Source, but get one of the cloud provider, let's say, versions or license distribution. They sometimes provide components to naturally create a login, but actually it's more the value of time to market for certain elements, maybe that they actually have monitoring or a storage or something else that they actually provide, which eases the development process, but actually you run into a risk of higher cost and also dependency. A telco company that I actually spoke to and that I referred to previously, they basically wanted to switch because they had a 48-hour outtime or downtime over the weekend for their consumer product. But when they actually then took a look at how they developed things, they actually used quite some components of that distribution, and it would have cost them about 6-digit figure to adapt the application to vanilla Kubernetes. So that creates then a lock-in. They then stayed with that provider and tried to move it into a managed cloud. But they actually, I think they experienced the outage in September, and they're still trying to transition. So this is actually costing them quite some time and creates actually quite some risk. Two examples from the cost aspect, which I actually haven't mentioned so far, is that a car manufacturer, for example, they wanted to lift and shift applications. That's something that we typically don't advise. This one specifically found out that the cost would quadruple, so 4 times more cost from on-premise to bring it into the cloud in a lift and shift approach. So that's something that you actually should closely analyze to make sure that you actually don't end up with a worse solution than you had. And a telco provider that, for example, they started off an RFI taking all the requirements from all the departments and putting everything into one thing. That actually then basically made them stop it because no solution provider actually would provide a comprehensive solution for everything. So really understand why teams want something instead of just going ahead and doing it. Good. So what I actually did is I ran through the different discussions and the experiences we actually have made and this, with different customers. Actually, I hope I gave you a good overview of what challenges you can run into. and would now like to open for questions. Hope you found this webinar helpful, and actually if you just reach out to me to discuss anything in detail, I can actually give you more information on the different aspects and examples provided, just to help you get onto a very smooth journey on your cloud native, or get to a setup that you actually are very happy with.